Welcome back to the Climate Playbook. I'm Barney Wong with One Tiny Drop, and we're here in episode 7 at the second part of the conclusion of Veils powered by habits on the functional side. Before we get into the second part of the conclusion, I want to give an overall picture why we're here, where we have been and where we're heading, and what are the shifts that I'm proposing through this video series. So why are we here? So this is the context why we're here. In this right here, this is from episode 1. We want to be actors, or our desire is to be actors in a sustainable planet. But where we're at is that we are victim spectators to an ailing planet. And between those two, desired and where we're at, we have a 50-year-old gap where we've been asking to fix the planet, but we're definitely not keeping up with that, and therefore the gap is widening. So that's the gap. We're trying to solve this gap. So where we have been basically in this top left here, and again, this is the overall map in a illustration form. And we've been talking about the cognitive machinery and how habits defeat our ideal process, where we cannot experience our aspirational self because we have the weights of the habits that is defeating the cognitive machinery through this veils, through the switch, and then through the handcuffs, and through also the changing of this pivot point for becoming less immune to the habits. And in a quick way, tying into this big overall map, we have this fan that where the current of mindless and disembodiment blows away the smell and the smoke of harm. And this analogy here, we have the planet in this oven right here that has been converted into calories and energy, and that's what we've been talking through habits. But also when we go into the next set of videos for ontological security and self, we'll also pick up how we extract from the planet symbolic benefits through self-esteem enhancements, such as a gold watch, such as traveling, more luxuriously, etc., as a way of building our self-esteem. So we're pretty much done with here, and then we'll be moving into the next set of videos called Ontological Security. And ontological security is this firm sense of self before engaging with the world in this bidirectional way, where the consideration is restored in some sense. And we'll be talking on ontological security as a soft primer into taking us into self, the construction of self, which is the third set of videos. And we'll also talk about modal confusion, which is this relationship between the buffering of ourselves in the ontological security, and how we need to convert the planet into calories and energy, and these enhancements as a way to build up this ontological security buffer to protect the self and all the construction that's problematic with it. So on the third set of video, we'll segue from ontological security using modal confusion. We'll get into the self, and we'll talk about the auto-narratives that make up self, and also the processes in self that we divorce the fluxing between the polar opposites. We only want to maintain one side of it, but divorcing the opposite side of it that make up the ethical, moral, and reflective space within this. Also, we'll talk about how there's a loss of subjectivity and relationality, which is the relationship between people as a result of this antagonistic or divorce relationship between this red and the green. So on the third part of this primer, there are things that I'm proposing to shift from the things that you know of into hopefully a new way of relating to the problem. So this is the old way of relating to the problem through our behavior, through our cognition, through our sense of awareness or lack of awareness. And this is the new way. And for this top half, this concerns this middle section, and I'll bring that up as we get into ontological security and self. But for this episode 7, the remainder of conclusion, what we'll be experiencing is the shift of this setting of the maintenance of self. And my proposal is we shift from dopamine is king, where it's a reward system, but it's highly pathological. And the shift is to this new, where we are in this ecology of friction, not relying on dopamine as the compass, but rather as we're relying on the friction as a way to protect the commons, such as the planet. The next one is in the old way, where we're fact and feedback avoidant to maintain a sense of equanimity, and the word I used was petrified, into integrating that fact and feedback into an evolution where we have a living sense of who we are in our equanimity. The third one is no longer having to depend on the old, where we use mindlessness and disembodiment as a way to not trigger harm, and to be mindful and embodied so that we can experience the aspirational self as to be sensitive to the harm that we cause in maintaining our psychological equanimity. The fourth one is instead of just limiting ourselves to problems that we react to, and we use avocado as the example, to also pick up much larger scale and more delayed problems that we need to prevent. And we use dams as the example, and the analogy in the same category is the planet. And lastly, we looked at the work of Bruce Alexander. We will look at the work of Bruce Alexander that describes the behavioral difference in rat cage and rat park. But in a rat cage, in the old way, we have put the burden solely on the individual to curb their appetite so as to limit the harm. But as we can see, dopamine as the reward system that's behind it is pathological. That burden is unreasonable. And rather, we pick up where we make changes to the situation, where we assist the individual so as to contain the harm, and that is through the rat park. So with that, let us go into the second part of conclusion so as to pick up these changes that I'm proposing. Welcome back to the 5-part series of Veils and looking at habits from the functional side. This episode covers the second conclusion, and I want to take the opportunity to have a pre-conclusion sharing or a pre-conclusion section to share how all these tie in and some personal stories related to this topic on habits as veils. I grew up in Malaysia, and I remember, I think the age of 8, we were, I think, gifted with 2 chickens. So as 8-year-olds, we enjoyed the interaction with chickens. They were caged. Once in a while, we let them out. We chased them around just to see whether we can catch them. And it was always, a interesting chore trying to catch a chicken to put them in the cage. But fortunately, sometimes we just leave the gate open or the cage open, and when it gets dark enough, they have the instinct to go in as a way of avoiding predation. I remember I was tasked with feeding the chickens with peas every day. And one day I remembered that we had a dinner, and there was curry chicken, which is one of my favorite dishes. And we asked around, hey, we didn't see the chicken this evening. Where's the chicken? Does anyone know what happened to the chicken? And my parents wouldn't say anything. And my grandma was tough as nuts. She just said, it's right in there. We cooked it in the curry. And all the children, I remember I have 4 other siblings, we were mortified knowing that what we felt was a pet chicken turned into our curry chicken. So behind the personal story is this ability to feel harm on a profound level when we are taken out of our disassociated, disembodied, and mindless state. We can return to this place of feeling harm on a profound level. But needless to say, it wasn't very long after that that I went back to eating curry chicken. And it points to our ability to go back into this disembodied and this mindlessness place by justifications. And it's interesting because I've conducted mini workshops with a men's group and with Zoom groups, and the understory of us being able to feel harm on a profound level, it comes back when we take it from the background of our salience map and put it on the foreground and give it the right context. With the men's group that I did a mini workshop with, most were able to relate their first experience with meat in a mortifying way, but yet they were able to send that first experience into the background so as to continue eating meat as a high value food. Same with the Zoom group, where I was able to take them through a meditative state of getting them out of the disembodied place and being fully embodied, and to experience an incident where one of the triggers, do no harm, was triggered, and they were able to connect with their primary response, which is the response that we have towards the situation without the justifications coming in and clamping it all down. So we can feel harm on a profound level when we go into the background and bring that up. But then again, by moving it from the background to the foreground, it leaves us in a very vulnerable place. And one of the things that we'll be covering in the next episode is how do we become resilient to disturbances of everyday life by ensuring that we do not have disturbing information that disrupts our equanimity. And that will take us into ontological security. So this is interesting. I came across a quote, and I think most people have, by John Cleese from Monty Python. And his quote is, "If God didn't intend us to eat meat, then why did he make them out of meat? If God didn't intend us to eat animals, then why did he make them out of meat?" And I got thinking about this, how this slogan or this quote was very powerful in the way of justifying eating meat. And one of the things I came to see is that it created the implicit protective assumptions that eating meat is necessary, eating meat is natural, eating meat is normal, and eating meat is nice. And these are the 4 N's that we'll be covering in the later episodes. But however, those 4 axioms or assumptions simply drives us into a place of unconsciousness where we do not feel we have choice in the matter. And this is the biggest thing, is having choice in the matter, whether we can avoid harm. So that slogan is powerful in the sense that it drives us into the pre-giveness of a place where it's unopen to challenge because it's protected by the four N's: necessary, natural, normal, and nice. So it's protecting a sacrosanct. Really, it's a rally towards protecting something that should not be challenged. And that's how powerful these quotes and slogans can be. So I want to reinterpret that quote from John Cleese. If God didn't intend us for it to eat meat, then why did he make them out of meat? Or to eat animals, why did he make them out of meat? I want to reinterpret that to say, well, the understory or the undernarrative in that slogan is, if God wanted us to eat meat, then why did he give us this unadulterated process to feel harm? And why do we have to avoid this process by going into the four N's, into this pre-given place that is unopen to conscious challenge? And this is where I think we can reinterpret our habits as powerful veils that takes us away from the harm that we are meant to experience. So this is the crazy part behind this 5-part episode. We can feel harm on a profound level. We have this ideal process minus these red marks where the here and now can arouse our aspirational self, and has these opponent processes where it will contain the here and now, our appetitive goal, in a way that considers the ethical implications and the reflective implications. But then we have habits, we use habits as a powerful way to defeat this ideal process. With these red marks right here, we talked about how the habits right here weighs down in a way that opens up, it spreads, and allows us to go after a bigger appetite without feeling the resistance of harm. It also stops the flow of pressure to arouse S2, the aspirational side, so that we can background the harm, and then it puts a squeeze into S2 by moving these pins, and that creates an immunity around the harm or the immorality of our acts. So it's a very powerful passive avoidance system, but it is there to defeat a system that precedes that. It does not have all these defeating systems such as this. It is already there for us to feel harm, just in the same way that I felt the harm when I was told that the chicken that I was feeding peas is in the curry soup. So I want to bring this all in to go into a useful definition of habit as we conclude in part 2. And habit is an initiation of behavior where it can be initiated without intention. You could be walking by, you see a piece of bacon and you grab it, and you might not have a mindful intention behind it. It can run to completion without conscious reflection. So you can eat that in a mindless way. You could be looking at your smartphone while you're eating your meal, and with it is built in as a sidelining of the ethical reflection that affords focus on the appetitive goal. Basically, it creates a tunnel vision on S1, and all the opponent processing, all this feedback loop that it has immorality or it has harm or we're working against ourselves, those things get out of focus or it gets sent back into the background. So this takes us to another point, which is ontological security. And I will cover this in the next episode. And that is the symbolic side of the veils in the pursuit of habit, that's powered by habit. This will give us a primer into the existential aspect of the maintenance of self. And the existential aspect of ourselves looks at, it's a symbolic sense of security. And ontological security, through the work of Jennifer Kent, will give us a primer into the anxieties that are produced from the existential, from our existential anxieties, I should say. So going back to how can we look at the rat cage and rat park and produce our first, sets of solution, just by defining the problem from an ill-defined place to a well-defined place. So I have right here is, again, going back to the study Addiction by Design, Natasha Dao-Shul, she had listed on the rat cage some of the conditions that are typified by our use of smartphone. And the first one is solitude. Most of us use our smartphone in solitude. We're not really interacting with each other. And that creates a cocoon effect. And the next one is fast feedback, where we cannot break the trance, and one of them is getting notification, from our postings on Facebook, Twitter, for example, Instagram, another one. So we get very fast feedback where we don't break the trance. The next one is random reward. We don't know what we're getting in terms of a notification. We don't know when we're getting it. So that is related to the addiction model, where we get a random reward. And then lastly, continuity without resolution. And they call this the Costco effect, or the Costco strategy, where you're making a profit based on volume. And the reason why they call it that is also in the smartphone world, the way that you maintain the person is entrenched in this addiction is there's an exponential amount of clicks that increases with time. So the person becomes more and more addicted as a way that they don't lose interest in the smartphone. And these are algorithms. Again, I would provide the link to talk about addiction by design and how they connect casinos to smartphones. But I'm taking it a lot further and trying to use this in the context of why we're not acting on climate change. So going back to continuity without resolution, she mentions that with the smartphones, there is no resolution. In other words, there's no story behind it. Well, when we go onto Facebook, there's no beginning, middle, end. It's just continue without a long arc to our behavior. And it's purely based on quantity. So let's go back to the rat park and tying it in with our habits and veils, and also to tie it with climate change. How can we look at the first glimpse of solution in the way that we can restore our ecology, our grammar? We can put ourselves in an environment where we're not nudged away into inaction, but nudged in, or actually induced into action, where we can avoid the avoidance as a resilient strategy, and then we can have a more robust and living form of equanimity. So we have here is first one is connection. When we get away from the cocoon, we go into connection. We insert ourselves into an ecology, not only an ecology of human-to-human interaction, but also an ecology of friction. So we don't develop this tunnel vision where we can post, let's say, disparaging comments, anonymously or in such a cocoon solitude way, whereas having to have a conversation with someone else, we are in this ecology of friction where we have to be reflective and we have to be ethical in our behavior, or we'll get a fast feedback and then we respond to the fast feedback in a way that we'll know whether our actions are productive or non-productive. The second one is batch feedback, and this in a smartphone. When you have just continuous fast feedback, you don't have room to have space, a breathing space. Again, it goes back to how can we be more reflective, and how can we be more ethical, and how can we introduce friction as a way to arouse our S2 aspirational side, so that we have this opponent processing, where the here and now does not become a runaway. We don't send out disparaging comments without feeling that we're harming the ecology that we belong in. When we're not in an ecology, we see ourselves, what I call, exceptional to that, and therefore we do not get the feedback. The third one is that there's differentiated in our reward, and this breaks the addiction. And in Natasha's podcast, this refers to how can we change the reward system where we get notification that we receive, let's say, emails from our family. That could be more important than just the random emails of people who are sending out junk mail, for instance, or even just solicitation, professional solicitation. So if we can get different notification chimes. Remember, in the casino, the key of C is the predominant tune that all the sounds are trying to promote the sense of, they're trying to make it through your filters, basically. Whereas this allows you to filter out the different signals from the sound and to have different, or in this case, signals, have the differentiation in the signals. This way you don't respond to it as fast to a junk mail as you respond to your family, for instance. And the last one is arc. There's a plot. There's a character to your actions, or the context of your actions. There's a beginning, there's a middle, end. And this focuses on quality, because as you know, if we watch a movie and it has a poor storyline, we just don't participate in it. We don't invest ourselves in it. So we become more discriminatory in how we participate, instead of having this storyless continuity without resolution, always inserting itself and making it pass our filters. Also, there's an arc, for me, there's an arc to what are we participating in the act of driving, the act of eating meat. And do we eat meat as this continuity without resolution? Is there a deeper basis, a deeper sense of self beyond just the maintaining the body? Is there a deeper existential arc behind it? Or are we using it as a balm to stave off the existential conflicts or anxiety that we have not identified for ourselves, defined for ourselves, and it remains this inner conflict that is causing us to resort to external buffers, when really we have all it does is just delays the inevitability. So that arc can be tied into our existential needs as well, and that we'll be covering that in the next episode. So for the next episode, I'd like to go into ontological security that deals with the mapping of the world. And from that, we can look at predictability, autonomy, and self-care as a way to ensure that our sense of self, we can maintain it, and we can ensure that we can see ourselves in the future versus a future that we cannot predict. Well, we don't have a sense of agency as an actor in it, and that our self-care, it's not maintained in that future state. So that's all I had for this wrap-up. Hopefully, I've brought all the pieces in together. We have reinterpreted that, and that there's a new pathway. We can look at another set of needs that are not obvious from the functional chasing of calories and energy. It will take us into a symbolic sense of self, into ontological security, how cars give us that sense of ontological security, and it keeps us on the time on device, using the casino analogy that leads to addiction. So just for housekeeping, if you like this video, please click a thumbs up. Also, please subscribe to the channel because every week I'll be coming out with new videos. And also post comments and questions so that I can clarify that would, I'm sure many people could benefit from. And so please support this work with those three requests. And I thank you for your time. And I'll see you in the next episode where we'll be talking about ontological security. Thank you.